because I have an idea sort of question problem for you when it comes
Ooh,
to ecological psychology and
ooh.
various problems posed by the traditional assumptions, and then ecological psychology tries to battle it, and then active inference research also tries to do similar things. How do we explain this stuff to other people and to people that don't particularly care too much about the theory and the abstract stuff? They care about, okay, how do I actually use this thing? So what? Like, what do I do with this? And a lot of the time, when I look at other individuals explaining complex topics, they use stories, metaphors, analogies, frameworks. And I was thinking, how do you stick some of the traditional assumptions into metaphors that can be simply explained when we use ecological psychology assumptions? The central executive is the one that I tried to tackle because I feel like it's the one that's going to be addressed the most.
Yeah.
Because copy of the world, yeah, okay, sort of get it, but the copy of the world leads to central executive, the mind, the thing that's disconnected from us that does all this processing.
Mm.
And the metaphor that, well, I guess it's a metaphor, the analogy, the story that I'm using at the moment is the one that everyone uses. It's a thing in a box, but the box can't see out of it. The thing in the box can't see out of the box. It's caged. How does it know what's going on outside?
Mm.
But that still adds a fair amount of complexity.
Yeah.
So, my question to you, how do you describe, explain, cover the central executive functions, the plight of the central executive, as Turvey used to say? Like, say I don't know about the central executive, I don't know what it is. Would you even bring it up in conversation?
No. So if they don't know what it is, no.
So, how do you address the problem? If they say, um, I have executive dysfunction. I'm struggling with executive dysfunction, and my brain doesn't have the amount, like the RAM, the storage. It doesn't have enough space to remember all these things. How would you address it?
So usually when someone asks about executive and say they have executive dysfunction, the first question I ask is going after their experience. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, what is that? Like when you say executive dysfunction, I go for the behaviors, basically, because then I can use those behaviors and interpret it perhaps slightly differently.
Okay, so using the example that I was just sharing, like I can't focus on my work because of executive dysfunction. That's the label that I would put on it, or would, as in this hypothetical situation. And I can't focus on anything because there's too much going on and my brain can't handle it.
Yeah.
Like, how would you address that? Because to me, at the root of that is the assumption of a central executive
Yeah.
having a limited capacity. So how would you address that?
So usually at that point, I would start looking for solutions with them. So instead of trying to explain the theory, I almost kind of skip it in a
Mm.
weird way until the problem is kind of reduced in their mind, until suddenly they can executively function. So usually it's shifting the environment. It's making changes. It sounds like there's a lot going on. It's a busy environment for them. They're seeing too many things at once. You and using their language the entire time. It's like, well, what can you do? What is the I find out what is actually there? Like what information are you seeing? What do you see? Like
That's a
list
lot.
them out for me. Yeah. And then we
But
kind of go through that
could we do
allotness.
a bit of role play?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So like you using that as an example, like right now. I can't stay focused. How would you help me focus?
So, first, what do you mean when you say focus? What does that look like? What does it look like when you're focused?
Paying attention to the podcast and engaging in the conversation. Because I'm not
So,
engaging in the conversation as much as I'd want to.
okay. Um, how could you engage more?
I don't know.
Like, what would you do
I don't
differently?
know. I don't know, but I want to engage more.
Cool. So, you're what are you engaged with? Are you engaged with anything right now?
Yeah, I keep playing with stuff. I keep moving around in my chair. I'm thinking about stuff out the window, thinking about stuff that I was doing yesterday, thinking about stuff that I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I got loads of other stuff that I could be doing, but instead of doing this,
Okay. So first question, do you want to do the podcast?
yes,
I say there was a you weren't focusing enough, you said.
yeah, during the
All right.
podcast
During the podcast. Why do you need to focus more?
because I'm always doing other stuff. Like I say, I'm playing with things, I'm thinking about other things in the past, and my brain just can't handle it.
Okay.
See, pondering.
Yeah. Well, first question, what if you didn't focus? Like, why is there a need? It sounds like that there is a need to focus more.
Mhm.
How do you focus more on things? Like, what do you usually do when you want to focus more
I don't know.
on? Talk about some.
I
What's
just think about stuff. I just think about
cool.
doing stuff.
Okay. So when you think about doing the podcast, what happens?
Oh, I still do the podcast. Like I'm in the podcast. I'm still doing it. It's just like right now, I'm distracted. I'm playing with a letter opener, sitting around in my chair. I'm also thinking about the video that I was planning earlier and thinking about the script that I was writing. I'm thinking about reading the document that I have up on my other screen. I'm looking out the window, recognizing it's raining, thinking about that
Hmm.
actually I'm going to be going outside later, so I might need to put some shoes and socks on because at the moment I'm currently in slippers, but I'm meant to be in this podcast.
So you're not in this podcast, but you're thinking.
I am in the podcast, just not as much as I'd want to be, because I can't think about all of that stuff at the same time, and it gets confusing.
What about it is confusing?
Well, I'm not engaged in the podcast as much as I'd want to be because I'm doing all these other things.
So to be more engaged,
Uh-huh.
are you getting what you want out of the podcast?
Yeah,
Do you feel that you'll get more out of the podcast by being more engaged?
yeah.
How does the things that you're talking about, does anything that you're talking about relate to the podcast?
Not really.
No?
No, I mean, most of the things I was talking about relate to doing other things outside of this podcast. I could use them in this podcast, which I'm doing right now. Obviously, a bit of a meta right there. Uh, meta in the role play. But yeah, like I could use them in the podcast, but I don't know whether that would be most effective for the podcast.
And how would you find out if it's most effective?
Well, working with the podcast co-host and working out what we actually want to be talking about.
And how would you do that? How could you do that?
By talking to them and asking them, obviously, we're in a very meta conversation here.
We are in a very meta conversation because, of course, we would be. Okay,
Yeah.
so through this conversation that we're having,
Uh-huh.
we are uncovering stuff related. What's the aim of the podcast for you? This is really weird now.
No, but that's it. So for me, we've then exited that conversation now.
Yeah.
For me, when you were asking the questions, I obviously I was being deliberately provocative with the
Oh, yeah.
answers. Um,
I love that.
Yeah. I was like, how can I be the most annoying person possible? Because that is how I
Yeah.
develop my practices. I'm like, what is the most annoying thing a person could do in this situation, and how can I try it and design a practice so that it isn't an issue? But yeah, so the for me, when I was looking at what I was saying or thinking about what I was saying, it took you a while to get to, okay, what's your intention?
Yeah.
Like there were questions. I'm like, well, I can answer these questions. They're easy questions. I like this. Like, yes, of course, but I'm still distracted. But yeah, there's loads of other stuff I'm doing. I'm thinking about more of these. All these other things don't really relate. Don't really matter. But it took a while to get to like, okay, well, what's the intention? What is the point? Why are you behaving like this? Um,
Mm.
which for me, like going back to the central executive, if it because I kept referencing my mind, my brain, I don't have the capacity. I can't think about all this stuff. Well, all of that stuff is moot if we don't have a central executive because you are doing it because you're an organism. You're not separated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I would have started with, okay, well, what are you trying to do? Well, I'm trying to do a podcast. Okay, well, are you making a podcast? Well, yes, you are making a podcast. Okay, so what's the issue? Well, I'm thinking about all these other things. Well, if you're doing the podcast, is it an issue? Like,
Mm.
I feel like that was something that you recognized, but you never mentioned.
Yeah. Usually when I often when I first start because often when I have these conversations on a daily basis with
Hmm.
clients and often there are like four or five other pieces that aren't referenced in the conversation. So make sure I find those first
Why?
and find that information
Why?
because I'm curious to understand the full extent of what's going on.
Okay. Because like when putting it into like a sporting context, if someone is trying to do a skill on a trampoline,
Mm,
right? Because obviously that's what I'm coaching. Um, and they're struggling to do the skill. I'm looking at the intention of that behavior right there.
yeah.
I'm not so interested in all of the other things that have happened. I do recognize all the other things that have happened, like at school it was busy, this, that, and the other. But as soon as I ask a question about something else, their attention obviously needs to go to that other thing. If the attention directing to the other thing is ineffective in getting the intended behavior, then I'm actually making it harder for the person to solve the problem because I'm now diverting their resources elsewhere. So I'm actually adding a distraction by asking a question to help me direct the behavior. Does that make sense?
Mm, yeah.
So I deliberately choose not to ask questions to follow my curiosity, which might help me understand their problem, because that is shifting their attention elsewhere from the problem.
Mm,
Like a lot of your questions shifted my attention from well, I'm distracted in this podcast to other things around it. Like I see the relevance and I see their relatedness, but it didn't help me move forwards with my problem
mm, yeah.
because it was describing, like you were asking questions about describing like all the mind stuff and oh well, is it related to this and could it be that? And you started pushing my attention to explaining how my head feels.
Mm,
But why do we need to explain how my head feels if we don't have a like a mind, a central executive thing in our head and it's just our
that's
body?
true. Yeah.
Because if you're describing a feeling, it's an internal feeling. Is that connected to
Mm,
you? Yes. So why do you need to explain it if you're doing it?
that's true.
Because perception action coupled.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's cool.
And those sorts of sort of role play scenarios are things that I do as part of my reflective practice. Because to
Mm,
me, that's reflection. That's
yeah.
not evaluation.
Mm-mm.
But being able to do that yourself can be challenging, especially if you don't have experience from both sides and if you're not skilled at recognizing affordances from other individuals and where those, excuse me, where those conversations may lead. Like,
Mm. Yeah.
which is where, as an academic, I spent a lot of time practicing the ability to argue both sides.
Mm.
I can argue most sides of conversations that I have, so that irrespective of the argument, the point, the claim that's made, I can recognize the positives, the negatives, the limitations, the goods, the bads, all of that, and focus, really like surgically focus on what the intention of the problem is. Because once the intention of the problem has been isolated, for exploration at least, you can then pay attention. Education of intention, education of attention allows you to better solve the problem. Once the problem is solved and you add complexity, now the intention is shifted. Now the attention will also shift, which is where all those other questions may likely emerge in the other
Mm.
problems. Oh, I'm doing this podcast, blah blah blah. It's really good, but I know afterwards I'm gonna have to do this thing. Oh, okay. So now you're worried about planning to go outside after the podcast. Yes. Oh, okay. Do you think it's effective to do that whilst in the podcast? Well, no, I'll do it after the podcast. Oh, okay. So now you solved the problem that was brought up in the previous conversation afterwards because they like it doesn't make sense to solve two problems at the same time. Everyone
Yeah.
recognizes that. Whereas when you brought it up, like I'm like, well, I've got this problem and this problem and this, and I was listing like 7 or 8 different problems. And I'm like, I don't need to solve any of these. But as soon as you bring my attention outside of the initial problem, i.e., I'm not focusing on this podcast, I'm now going, oh, I've got this one as well, and this one, and this one, and it just keeps going. And now this list of problems is huge, which obviously doesn't make me feel good.
No, that's true.
And it's similar with people on the trampoline. Like, oh, can you land on your bum and get back to your feet? I don't know. I'll try it. If I say, um, can you land on your bum? Or how many twists can you get to your feet after you've landed on your bum? And they're like, well, I don't know if I can land on my bum or if I can twist from my bum, and I don't know how far I can twist. So you're adding like 3 or 4 different problems on top of one. Like, start with one challenge, move it on.
Mm.
That's to me task simplification.
Cool.
But yeah, so going cycling all the way back to the original question with like mind central executive, even though it wasn't described, explained, or explored, it was still
Mm.
present in the conversation, I feel. Would you agree?
Yes.
So would you, because you mentioned overlooking the theory, sort of like skipping over the theory.
Mm.
I don't talk about central executive at all, like when I'm coaching, but I still engage with it.
How do you engage with it?
Well, with the intention.
Ah, cool.
Because focusing on the intention
Mm.
assumes that the organism is goal directed and
Mm.
assumes that they are directly, I would describe it, directly perceiving information. The relevant information is already available.
Mm.
So asking all the other questions about other information requires a different type, or a different, to label it, a different type, a different attention, because they're going elsewhere to try and perceive more.
Mm.
So I'm not focused on what's going on in the head. I'm focused on this conversation and the depending on the wording of the individual, the way that I would bring in some of the science maybe is to back down some of the assumptions.
Mm.
There were lots of words and terms and concepts that I was sharing in my role play there that if I was the coach, I would have either challenged or backed down.
Mm.
Backed down by saying, I can't think of an example right there. in that role play. But when someone says, oh, there you go, I can't remember all this stuff. I said, well, you just did. Like that would be me, an example of me batting it down. Well, you just did. You just told me all this stuff. Well, okay, yeah, yeah, fine. Like, but it's challenging and batting down the points they've made. And if they agree, oh yeah, 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 fine, that is an acceptance that actually they do have the memory storage to do all this stuff.
Mm.
Just small comment, back down the assumption. Then later on in the conversation, when they come back to it, I can say, well, you you remembered all that stuff earlier. Yeah. Well, you must be able to remember it all then. Well, yeah, kind of, I guess. And that's where they start finding dissonance in their own explanations, which is oftentimes where I actually leave the conversation because they need to ponder and understand, like recognize what's going
Mm.
on. Otherwise, whatever I say after that, they're like, but you said, yeah.
Mm. But yeah, but maybe what? Yes, I remember that well.
And obviously, some of the questions that you asked, I was like, yes. And other people would probably add more detail onto that.
Yeah,
What do you do when it comes to adding in more detail? Do you let people talk?
yes,
Why?
because it shows where their focus is, like what they're trying to like something matters that they're bringing it up, and I'm usually wanting to see where they're going and where they jump to.
Interesting. Because we perceive to act and we act to perceive.
Mm.
And as I mentioned, as I started listing things, I could think of more things to list.
Yeah.
And then I was listing more and more and more. But initially, I just looked outside and saw rain on the window. That was it. I was like,
Mm.
oh yeah, there's rain on the window, and oh yeah, I'm going outside later, and oh yeah, I'm doing this other thing later, and this other thing later, and this other thing. So I just kept going and going and going, and I could have kept going. I just chose not to. Um, so that for me, that can lead conversations astray.
Yeah.
And as the coach, what I tend to do when I'm coaching trampoline or having a conversation with other coaches is constrain it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't want to be rude. And I don't want to cut people off. And I recognize that there are other things that they could be thinking about.
Mm.
But I'm like, oh, okay. So all of the so I would ask, so all of these are related to this problem. Most of the time, go, oh no, no, no. So I'm asking them a question whether or not all of these other things are relevant. And most of the time they go, well, no, not really. And
Mm.
if they say, oh yeah, it does. Well, now we go, oh, okay. So this problem, this problem, this problem are all the same problem or they're slightly different? Oh, they're all slightly different. So how do they all relate to this original thing? Well, I guess it's more this one than that one. And
Mm.
now you've got, okay, here's the problem that we're focused on, which is normally the first one that they come up with. Because it was the first one that they were thinking about. Uh, and then explore from there. But the exploration when led when left to go or too much autonomy
Mm.
can whale who knows where.
Yes.
In sport, left with too much autonomy, kids will run all over the place. I mean, there was a participant on Friday. They were on the four trampolines and they just ran across all four trampolines because they didn't recognize that the gaps between the trampolines are meant to separate and you stay on your one, you don't go on the others. They didn't recognize those social barriers because I can run there, I'm going to run there. So they did. So there are things that we can do. We can put people to stop them from running there, but if we do that, then it becomes a game. Can I get past these people?
Yeah.
We can put walls up, but putting walls up on trampolines is very difficult. Or we separate a trampoline. So that's what we did. We separated a trampoline and they stayed on that one trampoline.
Mm.
How do we then educate them forwards? Well, make it harder for them to get across and help them recognize why they shouldn't go across.
Mm.
So they need to pay attention to certain information to keep their intention where it is.
Cool.
Yeah. Do you want to explore
Yeah.
any of that?
No, I think that's really it was really interesting to go through it, like from a role play perspective, because it's been a while since I've last done that.
With another person or at all?
Yeah, with another person,
Right.
which was fun. It was a nice experience to go through all of the like, and then explore it afterwards. Go, oh yeah, that was a thing I could have done. Oh yeah, that was a thing. Oh, that's interesting. I see how I went exploration and just hearing like the alternative
Yeah,
and the
because obviously
different.
you can do the same thing. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
like these are my thoughts. But that that's interesting because I do that on all conversations I have.
Mm,
Even sometimes when I have a conversation with a person, I will do
mm,
like a third person reflection with them afterwards.
mm.
So, oh, I said this thing and I asked this question. What did you think about that question? And they were like, oh, well, I didn't really understand what you meant at first, and then when we do blah blah blah. So I actually do my own sort of like reflective conversation with the person afterwards. Sometimes, depending on the person, depending on the situation, of course. I also find from an interpersonal perspective, like interpersonal knowledge, that helps build a connection because it's showing that, for me anyway, it's showing that you're respecting their competency.
Yeah.
They are competent individuals that can think for themselves, that know the answers, and you're asking them for a bit of help and guidance. So it becomes a two-way conversation rather than I have the answers, you tell me.
Mm, yeah. That was one of the things that for a long time I struggled with was the competency piece because often they like it was I perceived people who just their experience was just give me the answers. And because I always often had a lot of answers, I just gave answers because it was interesting, which then led to me having to try and find all the answers. And I was the one responsible for finding all the answers, for creating all the answers, because they couldn't possibly find the answers themselves. And then when introduced to the ecological approach, it's like, wait, why am I getting all the answers? I don't have all the answers. I don't need all the answers. You know the answers. It's you. Which has been like a journey for me.
That that to me is, I mean, first, it's really nice to hear. Um, but second, that to me is one of the issues with the person-centered approach, the holistic approach, or whatever words you want to put on
Mm,
that coaching, because that's what it is. What you've described is what it is. But what
yeah,
it's become is, oh yeah, we just give them a bit of choice. We just give them a
yeah.
bit more autonomy. It's more than that. It's not giving them
Mm,
autonomy. It's helping them believe that they can solve the problems themselves.
mm,
You can still set the problems. You can give them direct instruction and tell them exactly what to do. But if they have the belief, the competence, the confidence, the connection and character in order to solve the problem themselves, then it's still person-centered,
mm.
which is something that I'm trying to challenge some of the coaches in some groups with at the moment because they feel that person-centered coaching is autonomy coaching. And it's what I did on the level two trampoline course. They were saying, oh, you don't want to be person-centered coach. You don't want to be a person-centered coach all the time, especially with performance coaches, because they need guidance. You need to constrain their practice. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you can still be person. I didn't say this in the course because they're meant to be teaching me how to do the stuff. Um, yeah. Um, but person-centered isn't entirely autonomy.
Mm.
Autonomy supportive. Like autonomy
Yeah, supported
supportive.
autonomy. It
Yeah,
it is designed to be supported. Yeah.
yeah. It's not okay, just give them free reign, they can do what they want. No. That's not
Yeah.
what player-centered is. Player-centered is recognizing each individual is competent. They are a competent organism that can solve problems. So recognize they can solve problems and design problems that will help them problem solve.
Mm.
Like task simplification, give them a problem to solve that is like leveled to their current ability, their current capabilities. That is person-centered. It's not, oh yeah, throw them in the corner on that trampoline, they can do what they want over there. Or give them a ball and just tell them to stay in that half of the pitch. No. No, give them a problem to solve.
Yeah.
And and that relates to the number one fun factor, trying hard. Everyone wants to try hard.
Yeah.
And in order to try hard, you need a problem to solve.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, fun is not messing around and doing what you want. Fun is solving problems. And the coach, for me, the biggest job is to design appropriate problems.
Mm.
That's practice design.
That was remind me of a conversation I had with someone the other day around like they were talking very similarly to yourself, like in the role play of
Okay.
like, oh, I don't know, I can't, and et cetera, et cetera. And in it was like, well, what it came to, what do you want to do? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, what do you want? What is your intention? And we were having a conversation about that. It's like, well, I just can't do these things. And I actually asked a question around like, well, what would it look like? Like, like what is the problem you're trying to solve? And we went into like a problem solving mode because the moment you hit problem solving, people start getting interested and curious. And they mentioned that they are a curious individual. I'm like, ah, there we go.
That to me is a red flag. When people say, "Oh yeah, I'm a curious person," to me that's a red flag because everyone is a curious person.
Mm,
Everyone is nosy. Like if when you go to a meal and someone brings out food and like you can hear it, you can smell it, or you want to, you the first time you've been in there, everyone will look around and go, "How big's the plate? What's on that plate? What's it look like? Where are they going? Who's getting that food?" Everyone is curious. So when someone says, "I'm a curious person," to me, there's other information there that is making them say or making them want to say that.
mm,
So they don't feel like that they can ask questions, or they get batted down with questions,
mm,
or they don't follow through on their curiosity because they're worried about something. Like most of the time when people say, "I'm a curious person," there's a but.
mm.
There is a but somewhere.
There was a but.
Yeah. And it's the but bit that is the interesting bit. The curious bit's like, yeah, whatever. Everyone's curious. We're organisms. We're living organisms. If we weren't curious, we'd die. Because if we weren't curious, we wouldn't learn. If we didn't learn, we wouldn't survive. Like simple as.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah.
yeah.
Was there any? Yeah.
And it was interesting to as soon as there were problems to solve, the intention of the conversation, like their the way they held themselves, the way they communicated, everything shifted just ever so slightly. And it was like, oh, well, this and oh yeah, maybe. Oh. And it was like, oh, I could do it this, and all of the solutions that they could not find were found.
So do you ask people for a problem to start with? Like, like because I'm thinking about most business coaches that I see online. They're like, they'll ask the person for the problems that they've got. Like, oh, I can help you do this thing, or I can help you do that thing. And they're assuming a problem,
Mm.
which, and
I start with how can I help, usually, or what brings you here. Either how can I help or what brings you here
right,
is usually where I usually start with a conversation. Is like, how
and
can I
then they
help?
offer up the problem.
Yeah, they're off a problem. They're yeah, basically yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought because with most. people, from my experience, they have a problem they want to solve, and
Mm,
they look to go and get a solution from someone else.
yeah.
Um, so obviously the problem is first, and you mentioned problem solving is where people really start to get going. So where I'm where I'm intrigued to see what would happen is if someone comes in with a problem, say I want to get 1,000 I want to get 1,000 clients in the next 2 months.
Mm.
Pick a random example. And you
Mhm.
say, okay, well I can give you 1,000 clients. They go, okay, great. Is that it? Problem solved?
That was
And
my next question. They'd be like, oh yeah, but what about? Then they'd find other problems. Then they would find other problems, and then we'd
yeah,
explore the problems. Yes.
but if that person goes, oh, okay, bye, like they don't really have an idea of what their problem is.
Hmm.
Like the way I see it, like they have a problem. Yes, they want more clients, but what is the problem?
Mm.
Like that's not a problem. It's an outcome. They want money. Their
Yeah.
goal is to get more money. Their
Yeah.
problem isn't I I need more clients. Like that's not the problem. I don't see it as the problem anyway. I see that as the goal.
No. That's where they want to go.
Yeah. Um. So
So usually in that case, when they say I want 1,000 clients, it's like, okay, so how many clients do you have now? Like I start first, I find out what they have, and usually through what they have, they end up saying something like, yeah, well, I had like 20 clients at one point, but then my system started breaking down, and so I had to switch platforms because of this thing, because of that thing, and I'm like, oh, okay. So if I was to give you 1,000 clients now, what would happen? Like, what would happen if you had 1,000 clients right now? What would happen? Like, oh, and then they would explore that, and then we'd find
mm,
the other pieces. Like, okay, cool. And usually it's like, well, I wouldn't, I'd have to hire people. I don't really know how to hire more people. It's like blah 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 blah. Okay, so do you want 1,000 clients? No. Okay, how many clients do you want?
mm,
And then we would explore that. Because
mm,
usually people are like, oh, I want to earn £1 million. I want to earn a million this and a million that. Often another good one is pricing. It's like, oh, I don't know what to charge. Okay, well, how much do you need to make? I don't know. Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about like this and this and this, and you just like, are you the sole earning provider? Like, how much does it cost? Like, what? Let's look at what you have. So, oh, well, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, cool. How could you know? Like, what would you do to know? How do you keep track of your book? Oh, well, I don't. Okay, cool. I don't like numbers. Okay, cool. And then we explore the I don't like numbers thing, which is really fun.
you
'Cause
saw me
I
roll my
sort of
eyes. I don't like numbers. Ugh. Like
I
when
was the I don't like numbers person, which is why it made me giggle.
when people say I don't like numbers or I don't like words or I don't like English or whatever, I'm always tempted to use my own personal story when I went to university, because
Mm.
university asked me to write these essays and these articles. English was my worst subject at school. Written English was the worst part of that subject at school. I didn't like reading at all, ever. I never wrote. The only time I wrote things on a piece of paper was when I was doing maths and I needed the numbers. I
Mm.
didn't write. And then I
Mm.
go to university and they say, right, you have to read all of these books and articles, and then you have to write all of these essays, and you have to edit all of these essays, and then you have to read more essays and then edit them again. I'm like, I've literally just signed up to hell. Like these two things, the worst things that I'm like my basically my biggest weaknesses, reading and writing, were being tested at the highest level in education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why did I choose to do that? Because I wanted to become a sports coach. Could I do that? Yeah, I developed skills. So I'm not a numbers person. I wasn't a words person. And then I developed skills. So,
That's literally where I go. It's like, well, I know, neither was I. And so I just found a way to make it really, 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 really easy.
but don't you need to be talented to do that?
No, fuck no.
But you need to be
Talent's got
gifted and talented
talent's
to
got fuck all to do with it. Every time someone says, "Oh, well, I'm just not talented enough," I'm like, okay, so
That's an interesting assumption to explore.
Mm,
Talent, what does that mean to you?
a skill that's been developed. Someone's talented, they've developed a skill in something.
But you've just said talent's got fuck all to do with it.
Okay, fine, yeah, good point. Good point. Good point. Point taken. Talent itself, a common assumption of talent is gifted and a sudden magical ability that you have because your brain is wired for this skill. Your synapses are specifically wired to do this very particular thing in a very particular way. Except that all falls apart when the environment changes.
But when you're skilled at something, you're attuned, your organism is attuned to perform said skill. So would you
Yeah.
say anyone that is skilled is talented?
I guess so, yeah. I don't like it.
No, me either, because I think there's another assumption in there. I think you have another assumption in there, which I'm curious
Mm,
to see if you recognize. If if there is a child that is good at
mm.
something, would you say they're talented?
No, not
If you
really.
if there's an adult that's good at something, would you say they're talented?
No.
So, because we were just saying that if someone is skilled at something, then they're talented. So, when does someone become talented?
I suppose you don't. No. I think you really become talented. You just become. You just develop skill and expertise in something. That's literally it.
So, what does talent mean to you?
Wait, it's a moot point.
Well, there is a meaning because it's a word. We're like,
Yeah.
what meaning do you put on the word talent? If you don't have a meaning for the word, well, actually, that's impossible because
Mm,
you recognize the word, you have a meaning because you've
yeah.
detected the information.
I suppose talent is expertise.
So would you say that all of those that have high levels of expertise are talented? Those with medium levels of expertise are not talented?
No, because it's too binary.
Uh-huh.
So the assumption attached to talented is that there is a limit. There is an end point. Once you get to this level of skill, then you are skilled in this way, and that doesn't ever develop further, which is not true because yeah. So
Yeah.
talent is a stupid thing.
No, talented is a word for comparison.
Yes. Yeah. It's a comparison against
The
something.
the ED bit adds a comparison.
Mm,
You are more talented than that person. You are now more talented than you were before.
mm,
This kid is talented because they're the best in the group.
mm.
But what is talent? Not talented, talent. That kid has talent. That guy has talent. That girl has talent.
Expertise. Either expertise or skill. And skill itself is oh no, it's experience.
Hmm.
Of
So you say
experience.
every experience is a talent?
No. Hmm.
When you see someone play the guitar for the
Yeah.
first time,
Mm.
and maybe you say, "Oh, that person's got talent."
I wouldn't say that.
No, but I imagine you'd recognize someone that is
They've got
naturally
skill.
talented.
They've got skill.
Yeah.
I wouldn't assume there's a natural talent. I'd assume they worked for it.
Okay. So first time someone picks up a guitar and they they do the best, however you measure best,
Mm.
that you've ever seen, would
Yeah.
you say they are more talented than the rest of the people that you've worked with?
No, because there wouldn't be a comparison there was never a comparison. I never compared students. Like there was no comparison of students or
I
comparison of
don't
other
think that's true. I
people.
think you always compare students because everyone compares everyone. You can't not. If you created practice design for three different people, then you have compared their abilities and recognized that one
Yeah,
individual
yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
and recognized that this person is more able than that person, so I'm going to do this session instead of that session.
Yeah, no, that's
Because
true.
we perceive affordances for others.
That's true.
Perceiving
That is.
affordances for others means that we're recognizing the information and their action capabilities, which requires comparison. Right?
Mm,
Whether you voice the comparison and then impact changed your behavior in a way that's going to impact the individuals negatively, I think is what most people assume when they say, oh no, I don't compare people. As
yeah.
in, oh, you're good, I'm going to work on you more than you.
Mm,
That to
yeah.
me is a comparison where you've used a comparison, you've recognized that person's better than that person, I'm going to work on you. That's a philosophy built from a comparison. A
Yeah.
philosophy, a
I
practice, and
see.
behavior built from a comparison. So we're always comparing. It's what we do about the comparison, what we do about the information that I think people assume when we say, oh, no, no, I don't compare people. Yes, you do. We all compare people. It's what you do about the comparison that matters,
Yeah.
which I think is very similar with talent.
Mm,
Everyone has talent. It's what you do about the talent that matters. It's what you do about the potential of skill.
mm,
Because to be talented is to be skillful.
yeah.
And so talent is the potential to be skillful. That's the
Ah,
way I see it.
yeah.
And so potential, how do you encourage, explore, develop potential? Creating effective practice design.
Yeah.
How do you encourage, foster talent? Effective practice design. And so when we see gifted and talented individuals, you said it earlier, you assume they've done lots of practice before.
But they haven't necessarily.
Then what? They haven't necessarily what?
They haven't necessarily spent a bunch of time doing it,
But
thinking about it.
but doing what though? That's the thing.
Well, doing the skill, like developing the skill.
So when the first time I played handball,
Mm,
I'd never played handball before, but
mm,
I was told by the coach, "Oh, you're talented at this. You should pursue it."
mm.
But I'd never played it before. So how was I so good? Because of my physical capabilities.
Yeah,
Transferable skill is not very well defined in research because it's very hard to say, oh, if you do this, then you'll be really good at that.
yeah.
But
So
action
it's a bunch of
capabilities.
yeah, actually, yeah,
And so if we take the physical transferable skills, which again are hard to measure and put science behind, etc., we take that and we now remove the social label of physical. Maybe children that grow up surrounded by people that are playing musical instruments, maybe they go
yeah,
to live bands and they see it, or there's a guitar in in a room somewhere and they pluck it a couple of times, or they've seen their parents play before, or they're surrounded by music and they listen to lots of music. They've never actually played a guitar before, and then they go to a session, and it turns out that actually they can work out what note is what far quicker than others because maybe they've detected information that's relevant to this skill before.
yeah,
And so it's not that they're talented from birth, it's not in their genes, but it was developed through their previous experiences
yeah,
because everyone has potential talent in all individual skills. It's whether the practice environment is effective for them to develop the talent.
Mm. It
That's the way I
reminds
view it.
me of, it reminds me of Aiden because like he but actually both of them can pick up most music by ear and just play it. And when I think about it, there's a massive reason for that. There's been a piano in the house for a very long time. I played music, I taught music, we listened to a lot of music. So,
Hmm.
and whenever like we had babysitters and he was just gonna play, just start playing pieces of music, they were like, "Oh, he's so talented," and I'm like, "Mm."
It's just the thing he does.
"Yeah, it's just a thing."
And that is where Magnus Carlsen did had a conversation with Joe Rogan recently. I don't know whether you saw it. No, but he spoke about his practice, and he didn't like coaches that gave him homework. He didn't like coaches that told him to practice certain lines, and he's known apparently in the chess world as being quite lazy.
Mm,
But why is he lazy? And how is he lazy? How is that like described? Because of the type of practice he's doing. Is he practicing? Yes. Does
yes.
it look the same as the others?
No.
No. But he's still practicing because he's doing it in his head. He's doing it without a chessboard.
Mhm.
But he's still practicing the experience of playing chess. He's still exploring the games, the moves. And so he's still practicing, but he's practicing in a different way
Mm.
because there's still an experience going on, which
Yeah.
means that you can practice something without doing it, which is where I personally think people learn skill, those that like are talented and learn skills fast is what they're doing. Like we have trampoline every Friday. If someone does something on a Friday, they struggle with it, and then they're thinking about it over the next week, they're still experiencing the skills. They're
Yeah.
still practicing the skills. And then when it comes to being on the trampoline, it's a different type of practice of the skill.
Yeah.
That's the way that I would view it and explain it.
Yeah. It's very similar. So I've started voice training on Friday. So, um, and it was really interesting. So
Voice
for
training.
context, so voice training,
Oh,
when some,
yes, yes, I know what it is.
yeah, for
You can
context,
explain it if you want.
yeah, cool. Voice training is where, well, you train your voice. So for me, it's training it from a more masculine voice to a more feminine voice and just changing the timbre of my voice, basically. And so that I started that on Friday, and we were talking, they were referring to it as active and passive practice.
Hmm.
And it's the same concept here. Like, because now one of the exercises I was given was breathing exercises. And now I am constantly thinking about those exercises and how I'm breathing in day-to-day life.
What does that mean? You were given an exercise,
They told me to do something.
but was there like a specific time frame amount, or was it just maybe think about this?
Oh no, there was like I practiced this for 20, I think it was about 15 minutes a day of active practice twice a day.
Right. It's just interesting because that is the homework that Magnus is like, nope,
Mm.
not doing that. And I don't give homework. I don't see the relevance. Um, because when I think about homework, it's about asking someone to solve a problem more than once. Like
Yeah.
yeah, like you're constantly
Like
giving them.
right
Mhm.
now I'm solving the problem because I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about how I'm breathing, how I'm using my diaphragm.
Mm.
I'm not actively doing the homework right now, but I am. doing the homework right now because I'm thinking about the homework. I'm thinking about how I'm holding myself as I breathe. I'm thinking about the position of my diaphragm and where it is. And as I'm breathing out, I'm feeling for the contraction in my core muscles. I'm thinking about all of those things as I am talking about it.
It's
So, so
it's
I am not doing the homework, but I'm also doing the homework because I cannot not do the homework because I'm doing the homework.
yeah, it's paying attention to breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why to me, if if that person had said, think about your breathing,
Mm.
do you think you would have needed the active you need to do this
No,
amount? Okay.
no. I was already thinking about the breathing as we had explored it in the session and like the different breathings and using the difference between the two. Um, I would have done it anyway.
Yeah. That to me, this could sound harsh to people that give homework, sorry, but that to me is where the coach doesn't trust the learner. Because if the coach feels like they need to give the learner homework, they don't trust the learner to be an autonomous problem solver and competent problem solver in developing the skill on their own. I know the majority of individuals at Eastbourne Trampoline will try and find a trampoline to problem solve the skill that they were trying to do on the Friday. Because
Mm.
some of them come back to me and say, we went to a trampoline park and I was doing this thing. Or I went to a friend's house and we got on the trampoline and we were doing this thing. Or I went on this trampoline at home even though it was raining and it was a really bad idea, but I got this skill. Like, they are determined to learn the things.
Yeah.
I don't have to set them homework because they are interested and they are motivated within themselves to do it. And I think personally that's because of the culture and the environment that we have created at Eastbourne Trampoline. Because it's not, you need to do it like this, blah, 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 blah. They are problem solving themselves. As soon as someone's interested in solving a problem, they will try and solve the problem. I don't need to
Mm.
tell them, right, go home on your trampoline, do this thing. Forget it. They'll figure it out on their own. Because I trust that all of them are interested in solving those problems.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think I was a bit harsh on those that give homework?
No, not really, because I don't get homework. Sometimes I'm like, think about this thing. Like my homework is think about this. Like that's literally it. So think about this, which I know they're going to do anyway, but it is just the reinforcing of like, yeah, it's okay to think about these things during that time. Like think about it. Like consider it. What does that mean? Like maybe you want to do this, maybe try that. Like it's an invitation, not a do this thing.
Yeah,
And
no.
that's usually it, the extent of my homework.
Hmm. I was just looking at the time because I don't know how long we've been talking for, but apparently we've been talking for an hour. So
Oh, cool.
we might want to start wrapping this up. So is there anything else you want to add about information, directions, homework, central executive, metaphors for ecological psychology, or simplifying some of the concepts and terms, or maybe the role play that we went through? Anything else you want to question, query, ponder?
No, that's good. Oh, yes, I do want to ponder loads of things, but we would be here for 3 hours versus one.
Fun. Yes. Right. So thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.